Have you ever felt like you were slowly disappearing? Not because you left, but because they stopped seeing you. There was a time when everything felt perfect. Laughter in the halls, love in the air, and every heartbeat felt like home. But what happens when the warmth starts to fade? When you're still there, still loyal, but suddenly you're no longer their favorite? This is not just a story. It's a reflection of what we often overlook, a silent cry, hidden in plain sight. Welcome to the story of someone they forgot, a soul they left behind. But what he did next will leave you speechless, because this is the story of a dog, and the step he took will shake the way you see loyalty forever. The Happy Family. In a quiet neighborhood nestled among tall trees and chirping birds, there lived a small but joyful family. Mark, a hard-working and kind-hearted man, worked as an architect. His wife, Emily, was a gentle and loving woman who spent most of her time taking care of their home and nurturing their only son, Ben. Ben, an energetic 8-year-old, was the heart of the family. Curious, affectionate, and full of life. Their days were filled with laughter, stories over dinner, and evening walks in the park. Though their lives were already peaceful and complete in many ways, the family often spoke about getting a pet. They believed a dog would not only bring more happiness into their lives, but also teach Ben responsibility and compassion. After weeks of searching, they came across an adoption center that had just rescued a pair of twin puppies. Fluffy, golden, and brimming with innocence. It was love at first sight. Without a second thought, Mark and Emily adopted both. They named the more energetic one Leo and the quieter, more observant one Max. The puppies brought a new kind of joy into their home. Ben was especially thrilled. He would spend hours running around the garden with Leo and Max, playing fetch, teaching them tricks, and even having imaginary conversations with them. The dogs quickly adapted to their new environment and became an inseparable part of the family. Leo was quick to win everyone's attention. He was lively, always bouncing around, barking happily, and wagging his tail with excitement. Max, on the other hand, was gentler. He liked to observe before acting, preferred calm cuddles over wild games, and often sat quietly beside Ben while he did his homework. Despite their different personalities, both dogs were deeply loved in the beginning, and the house echoed with the sounds of joy, paws on tiles, and Ben's laughter. Emily would often cook special meals for the dogs, and Mark built a small doghouse in the backyard for them. On weekends, the family would take them to the park, where the dogs ran freely, chased butterflies, and played in the grass. Life seemed perfect. The bond between Ben and the dogs was especially strong. He would often whisper his little secrets into their ears and believed they understood every word. Time passed, and the puppies grew into beautiful adult dogs. Their personalities became more distinct. Leo remained the family clown, always up to something, chasing his tail or performing little tricks that made everyone laugh. Max, while still loyal and loving, remained calm and quiet. He was the one who would lay his head on your lap when you were tired and would silently follow Ben around the house. Though both dogs were deeply attached to the family, slowly an invisible shift began. Leo's outgoing personality drew more attention. Guests who visited praised Leo for his energy and tricks. Emily would often record Leo's antics on her phone and post them on social media, where he quickly gained followers. Mark started referring to Leo as the superstar. Ben, too, began spending more time playing with Leo, mostly because Leo was more responsive to games. Max, though still part of the family, started receiving less attention. His quiet nature, once adored, was now overlooked. He was still fed, still petted, but not with the same warmth or frequency. He began sitting by himself more often, watching from the corner as his family showered Leo with love. Still, Max remained loyal, He wagged his tail whenever someone passed by, tried to join in the games, and never once showed resentment. Despite the imbalance, Max never gave up on loving his family. His eyes still lit up when Ben came near, and he never missed a chance to sit by Mark or Emily when they were alone. In his silent way, Max hoped that maybe one day things would return to the way they once were, when he and Leo were loved equally, and when the quiet love he offered was enough to be noticed. The shift in attention. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, a subtle but unmistakable shift began to take place in the household. Leo's playful antics continued to dominate the family's attention. He had become the star of their home, often leaping into the air to catch toys or rolling over dramatically to entertain Ben and his parents. Everyone laughed and clapped when Leo did something amusing. The dining table conversations were filled with, "Did you see what Leo did today?" And "Leo is just the smartest dog ever." Max, once equally adored, now seemed to drift quietly into the background. He was never loud or attention-seeking like Leo. Instead, Max was calm, the kind of presence that brought peace rather than excitement. But unfortunately, peace often goes unnoticed in a world that celebrates noise and show. Ben still loved Max. That love hadn't disappeared. But like any child, he was naturally drawn to the pet that gave him the most immediate feedback and thrill. Leo chased balls faster, jumped higher, and barked joyfully whenever Ben walked in the door. Max, on the other hand, would calmly approach and gently nuzzle Ben's hand. Sweet, but easy to overlook when you're young and looking for excitement. Emily and Mark were unknowingly enabling the imbalance. Emily would buy treats, mostly Leo's favorites, and Mark began training Leo to do more advanced tricks, often saying, "He's got a performer's spirit." They didn't mean to exclude Max, it just happened. Max still got food, water, and a place to sleep. But the emotional warmth, the extra belly rubs, the playful games, they were all reserved for Leo now. Max didn't complain. He never barked out of jealousy or fought for attention. But he noticed. Dogs always notice. He would sit at a distance and watch as Leo got the attention he once shared. He'd try to join in sometimes, wagging his tail eagerly, only to be gently pushed aside with a "Not now, Max." The evenings, once filled with shared cuddles on the couch, now became scenes where Leo lounged in Ben's lap while Max lay on the floor, unnoticed. Emily used to call both dogs into the kitchen to offer them scraps while she cooked, but now she mostly called Leo. Max waited quietly outside the kitchen door, hoping she'd remember. Despite it all, Max continued to love them unconditionally. He greeted them at the door, followed them around the house, and always stayed close, hoping to be useful or noticed. He protected the home just as fiercely, barking at strangers and sitting near the front door when Ben was away, waiting for his return. One evening, while Emily was looking through her phone gallery, she realized something unsettling. Almost every picture was of Leo. Leo jumping, Leo sleeping, Leo dressed in a costume. She scrolled and scrolled, and only after a long while did a single photo of Max appear. It was old. A pang of guilt tugged at her heart, but she quickly brushed it aside, convincing herself it was nothing. But Max felt everything. He felt the growing distance, the coldness in their once warm home, and yet he remained loyal. That's the thing about love. Real love doesn't depend on attention or rewards. It simply exists, steady and unwavering. Max hoped that one day the warm hands that once patted his head lovingly would remember the quiet dog who never stopped loving them. The picnic plan. Days turned into weeks, and though the routine of the house went on as usual, something subtle but heartbreaking was happening in the shadows. Max had grown quieter. Though he wagged his tail when called, and still ran to greet Ben at the door, but his eyes often lingered on the distant corners of the room. Leo would be in the spotlight, performing small tricks to the applause of Emily and Mark, while Max sat at the edge, observing silently, hoping for just one glance, one pat, one whispered praise, but it rarely came. One Friday evening, Mark excitedly announced a weekend picnic. "Let's go to the hills," he said cheerfully. "The weather is supposed to be perfect, and it'll be a great chance to relax." Emily clapped her hands in delight. "Yes! And Leo has never been to the hills before. He'll love it." Ben, though thrilled by the idea, turned to Max, who sat beside the couch, ears perked up hopefully. "Can we take Max too?" he asked. Emily glanced over distractedly. "Yes, of course," she said. "But make sure he doesn't mess up the car. Put a blanket in the back." Ben's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. That night, Max lay on the floor beside Ben's bed. He felt the boy's fingers gently scratching behind his ears. "I know they don't see you the same anymore, Max," Ben whispered, "but I still love you. Always." Max closed his eyes, letting out a soft sigh, content in that brief moment of comfort. The next morning, the family bustled around, preparing snacks, packing drinks, and laying out clothes for the trip. Leo wore a little harness with his name stitched in golden thread. Emily lovingly combed his fur and kissed his head. "Our little prince is going to see the hills," she cooed. Max stood by the door, waiting. When it was time to leave, Mark opened the car trunk and placed the picnic basket and other items inside. "Ben, put Max back here," he said, patting the area near the luggage. "We don't want him jumping all over the seats." Ben hesitated. "Can't he sit with me? Just for today?" "There's no space, honey," Emily interjected. "Leo's already taking up the back seat with you. Max will be fine." Ben reluctantly led Max to the trunk area, making sure he was comfortable. He gave him a hug before climbing into the back seat beside Leo, who was already panting with excitement. As the car rolled out of the driveway, Max gazed through the small rear window. He watched the houses blur by, the trees lining the road, and the sun rising over the distant hills. The wind whispered through the slightly open crack, bringing scents of flowers, rain-soaked earth, and adventure. It should have been a happy day. The drive to the hills was scenic. The sky was painted in soft pastels, with clouds lazily drifting by. Birds chirped in the background, and the sound of the tires on the gravel road added rhythm to the journey. Mark was humming a tune. Emily was flipping through a travel magazine, and Ben occasionally fed Leo tiny treats from a bag. Max, squeezed between bags and blankets, shifted slightly to peek outside. The wind cooled his face, and for a moment he let his tongue hang out, trying to catch the breeze. When they reached the top of the hill, Mark pulled over at a quiet spot surrounded by tall trees and wildflowers. They all got out, stretching and breathing in the fresh mountain air. Emily opened the door, and Leo sprang out, barking joyfully. Ben rushed to the back and opened the trunk for Max. The dog stepped out carefully, his limbs slightly stiff from the cramped ride, but his eyes sparkled at the sight of open space. He looked at the family, hopeful. Maybe today things would be different. They laid out the blanket, set the basket down, and began eating and chatting. Leo chased butterflies, receiving cheerful laughs and calls of praise. Max sat quietly beside Ben, occasionally getting a pat or a piece of sandwich. But he could feel it, that invisible distance. He wasn't part of their world in the same way anymore. As clouds began to gather in the sky, a gentle wind picked up, rustling the trees. The sun dimmed slightly behind the growing cover, and a sudden chill spread through the air. Mark glanced up. "Looks like rain might be coming sooner than expected. We should head back." They hurriedly packed up. Ben helped Max into the trunk again, his heart heavy. The sky darkened, A drop fell, then another, and then, within minutes, the heavens opened up in a torrential downpour. Thunder rolled over the hills as Mark drove carefully down the winding road. Everyone laughed nervously at the sudden change, treating it like a fun adventure. But at the back of the car, Max curled up silently beside the bags, wet and forgotten, his heart growing heavier with every splash of rain. He looked out one last time at the hills. Somehow, he sensed that something was about to change, something big. And soon, the rain and the incident. As the family continued their journey higher into the hills, the excitement in the car was still evident. Ben was chatting away with Leo, giggling and petting his soft fur, while Mark and Emily talked about how beautiful the picnic spot would be. The narrow, winding road curved through the greenery, and the elevation gave them a clearer view of the valley below. Max, however, remained at the very back of the car, lying beside the picnic baskets and luggage, with his chin resting on his paws. His eyes followed the trees and the birds as they zipped past, but his heart was heavy. Max wasn't just physically separated from the family, he felt emotionally distant too. He could hear the laughter and voices from the front, but none of them had turned to check on him even once since they left home. He missed the days when Ben used to hug him tightly, when Emily would scratch behind his ears, and when Mark would throw a ball just for him to chase. Now, it seemed like he had become invisible. Suddenly, the warm, bright day started to change. Dark clouds rolled in over the hills, and a cool wind swept through the trees. A few raindrops began to fall. At first, the family welcomed the change, finding the drizzle refreshing after the long drive. Ben opened the window slightly to feel the rain on his hand, laughing as tiny droplets splashed on Leo's nose. Emily took out her phone and began taking photos of the moody sky, but within minutes, the drizzle turned into a heavy downpour. Thunder cracked in the distance, and the road quickly grew slippery. Visibility reduced, and the cheerful mood inside the car began to shift. Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to keep control as the tires occasionally slid over the wet road. Emily suggested they find a safer place to stop until the rain passed, but the road was too narrow, and there were no proper shoulders or spaces to pull over. In the back of the car, Max's fur was getting damp from a leak in the rear window. The luggage had shifted due to the car's movements pressing against him. He whimpered quietly, shivering slightly, but his sounds were drowned out by the roar of the rain and the music still playing faintly at the front. He looked toward the front of the car, hoping someone would notice his discomfort, but no one did. Tension inside the car grew as the road narrowed even more, now bordered by a steep cliff on one side and a thick forest on the other. Mark, trying to stay calm, mentioned a shortcut he had seen on the map earlier. A narrow dirt path that connected back to the main road, cutting travel time. Emily hesitated but agreed, trusting Mark's instincts. Mark slowed the car and carefully began reversing to make the turn towards the shortcut. The rain pelted the windshield, and the wipers struggled to keep up. The car's tires hit a patch of mud, and before anyone could react, the vehicle slipped. Everything happened in an instant. The tires lost grip completely, and the car started sliding sideways down the incline. Emily screamed. Ben clutched Leo, terrified. The car spun slightly and tilted toward the cliff's edge. Mark frantically tried to steer, but the car wouldn't stop. In the chaos, Max barked loudly and instinctively leaped out the back when the door flung open from the pressure. He tumbled onto the wet grass but quickly got back on his feet, chasing after the sliding car. His paws splashed in the mud as he ran alongside, desperate and panicked. The car finally slammed into a tree just a few feet from the edge of a sharp drop. The vehicle rocked from the impact but held steady. Inside, the family was shaken, frozen in fear. Leo whimpered in Ben's arms. Emily was trembling, holding onto Mark's arm. Outside, Max stopped running and stood a short distance away, soaked and muddy, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He could see the family through the foggy glass, trapped and scared. He barked, loud, urgent, and determined. No one else was around. The rain had driven away other travelers. There was no help in sight. Max looked back down the road, then back at the car. His eyes were wide, filled with a mix of worry and resolve. He knew what he had to do. Without a second thought, he turned and bolted down the hill, slipping and stumbling but never stopping. His only thought, get help. Save them. The loyal dog they had forgotten was now their only hope. Max's heroic act. The rain was still pouring heavily as Max raced down the mountain road. His paws splashed in puddles, slipping now and then on the wet gravel, but he kept going. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his breath coming out in harsh pants. Each beat of his heart was driven by one desperate thought. His family was in danger, and no one else knew. If he didn't do something, no one would. His vision was blurred by the rain, but he didn't slow down. He ran past trees, bushes, and rocks, his soaked fur clinging to his body. His legs burned with pain, but his spirit refused to give in. The memory of the family trapped in the car flashed in his mind. Ben clutching Leo, Emily crying, Mark shouting instructions as the car tilted, and Max pushed himself harder. The road twisted and turned, and Max finally reached a broader stretch of highway. His eyes scanned the road, and then he saw it. Headlights. A vintage truck was approaching slowly, its tires cautiously navigating the slippery surface. Max positioned himself in the middle of the road, barking wildly. The truck driver honked and hit the brakes, the vehicle screeching to a stop just a few feet away from Max. Inside the truck, an older man with a white beard and weathered face leaned out the window, squinting through the rain. "What the dog? Are you lost?" he muttered. Max barked again, circling the truck, then running ahead a few steps before turning back, barking more insistently this time. The man frowned. "You want me to follow you?" he said aloud, puzzled. Max barked once more, ran a short distance, then turned to look at him. His body language was frantic but clear. The driver hesitated for a second before opening the door and stepping out. All right, you've got my attention, buddy." Max ran to the door and looked up at him with pleading eyes. The man opened the passenger door. "Hop in, let's go see what this is about." Max didn't wait for a second invitation. He leaped into the truck, soaking the seat with rainwater, but the man didn't care. He climbed in, started the engine again, and followed Max's directions. Every time Max whined or barked or scratched at the window, the man adjusted the path. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the city. Max immediately jumped out the moment the truck stopped. The man called out, but Max was already sprinting down a side street. He ran straight to the local police station, where two officers were standing under an awning, trying to keep dry while drinking tea. Max barked loudly, startling them. "Hey, what's wrong with this dog?" one officer said, standing up. Max didn't let them ignore him. He grabbed the hem of the officer's pants with his teeth, not hurting, just tugging, and pulled. "Whoa, what's gotten into you?" the second officer asked, stepping forward. The older man in the truck caught up, drenched and out of breath. "That dog, he led me here. Something's wrong. I think he's trying to tell us something." The first officer knelt down, looking into Max's pleading eyes. All right. Let's see what he's trying to show us." Max took off again, this time with a police van following behind. The rain hadn't let up, and the roads were treacherous, but Max didn't stop. His feet ached, but his heart was stronger. At last, they reached the narrow mountain road. Max led the way, slipping between trees and puddles, until he stopped at the edge of the road near the tree where the car had crashed. The van stopped, and the officers jumped out. They were stunned by what they saw. The car was lodged tightly against a thick tree, its front half tilted dangerously over the edge. Inside, Mark, Emily, Ben, and Leo were still trapped, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. The windshield was fogged, but they saw the flashing red and blue lights and heard the bark they knew so well. "Max!" Ben cried, tears pouring down his cheeks. Mark rolled down the window and shouted, "Help! Please, we're stuck!" The officers acted quickly. Using their equipment, they pulled the vehicle back and got the family out one by one. Leo whimpered as he was cradled in Ben's arms. Emily and Mark hugged each other, shaking and drenched, and Max, soaked, muddy, and exhausted, stood nearby, wagging his tail weakly as Ben ran toward him. "You saved us," Ben sobbed, hugging Max tightly. "You saved us all." Max closed his eyes, his tail still wagging, as if to say, "Of course I did, I'm your family." No one noticed the rain anymore. They only saw the loyal dog who ran through the storm to bring them back to safety. The reunion and lesson. As the police and rescue team guided Mark, Emily, and Ben out of the damaged vehicle, Max stood there panting, his eyes locked on his family. His golden fur was soaked, caked with mud, and his legs trembled from exhaustion, but his tail wagged the moment he saw them safe. Mark limped toward him, his voice choked with emotion. "Max, you saved us." Emily knelt beside Max, her eyes glistening with tears. She gently cupped his face, kissing his muddy head again and again. "I'm so sorry, Max. We forgot how much you mean to us," she whispered, sobbing. Ben wrapped his little arms tightly around Max's neck, burying his face in his fur. "I missed you so much, Max. I love you." Paramedics helped the family into ambulances, but they made sure Max was not left behind. A kind officer wrapped Max in a warm blanket and sat beside him during the ride. At the hospital, doctors examined everyone. Luckily, their injuries were minor, just a few bruises and scratches. Max was also checked by a local vet the hospital had called in. Though dehydrated and exhausted, he was fine. A true miracle. Later that evening, they returned home, shaken but grateful. The warmth of their house felt different this time, deeper, more meaningful. The silence that once followed Max's lonely footsteps was now filled with gentle voices calling his name, petting hands, rubbing his back, and genuine affection in every gesture. That night, the family gathered in the living room. A blanket was laid out on the floor, and Max lay comfortably at its center, his head resting on Ben's lap. Leo came over, nuzzling his brother apologetically, and the two dogs curled up beside each other. Mark cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on Max. "I never thought I could be so blind," he said. "We brought Max and Leo into our lives with equal love. But somewhere along the way, we let our hearts drift unfairly. Max never once complained. Even when he was ignored, he stayed loyal. Even when we hurt him without realizing, he protected us." Emily, wiping away tears, added, "I looked at Leo and saw joy, but I never looked at Max long enough to see his silent sadness. He didn't just save our lives, he saved our hearts. He reminded us what family really means." Ben, still stroking Max's fur, said softly, "He never left me. Even when you forgot, he still played with me. He made me smile." In that moment, a quiet understanding settled among them. They realized that Max's loyalty had not only saved their lives, but also healed a fracture they didn't even know had grown in their hearts. They had become blind to kindness, and it took a storm, an accident, and a faithful dog to open their eyes. From that day forward, everything changed. No longer was Leo the only one getting special treatment. Now, every walk, every meal, every cuddle was shared. Max was given a new soft bed right next to Leo's. The family even made a framed photo collage of Max's heroic day and placed it in the living room above the fireplace with a title that read, "Our hero Max. Mark started taking both dogs to the park every morning before work. Emily ensured their meals were balanced and even prepared homemade treats for them on weekends. Ben, true to his word, made sure Max got the biggest hug before bedtime. The story of Max's bravery began to spread in the neighborhood. The local newspaper featured him on the front page, calling him the Miracle Dog. Children from nearby houses came by just to see him and give him treats. Max never seemed to crave the attention, but he accepted it all with gentle eyes and a soft tail wag. But most importantly, the love in the house grew stronger than ever before. Max had not only saved his family from a deadly accident, but from drifting apart emotionally. He had shown them that loyalty and love should never go unnoticed, that sometimes the quietest hearts beat the loudest when it matters most. And so, the family lived on, never again letting favoritism cloud their hearts. Max and Leo, once divided by affection, now stood side by side, sharing the spotlight of their family's love. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear muddy paws and silent eyes full of love.